medically understood.
Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards here, and this is the Ultraviolet Podcast. And today I am joined by Mica, also known as Ponderful on YouTube. Mica is a YouTuber. She spends most of her time talking about neurodiversity and autism specifically, and we spent a lot of time talking about that, describing her being diagnosed in her 30s, as well as my own diagnoses that I received later in life, and just discussing the neurodiversity movement in general and talking about how that interfaces with a lot of other public advocacy or quote-unquote advocacy for neurodiversity, and just sort of what it means to be somebody who is not neurotypical in the world today. We also talk about what it means to be a cis person who is publicly advocating for trans rights, and how to navigate that very delicate balance of being an advocate in spaces where you have a impetus to be an advocate, while also not sort of sucking all the oxygen out of the room for trans people who are trying to talk about their own experiences, and just sort of how we have both navigated that and what our approach to that is. And then we spend a lot of time talking about climate change, what people can do or should do about it, direct action and community building, and how that all sort of gels and relates to facing down this coming cataclysm that we're all staring down the barrel of. As far as content warnings go, there are brief mentions of sexual assault. We specifically spend a lot of time talking about ableism and transphobia. And we also talk at great length about climate change and the end of the world as we know it, and how to manage that, to include direct action, which includes attacking infrastructure and potentially doing damage to property. So if any of that is going to cause you psychic damage, put you in any amount of mental distress, then I won't take it personally if you skip this one. For everybody else, I give you Mica. Mica, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. Why don't you just tell everybody who you are? Like, Whomst is Mica. How'd you wind up being on the Tubi places and doing all this stuff that you do?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Mica, and I go by Ponderful online and on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and wherever else I can get my hands on these days. And Mastodon. And yeah, I make video essays essentially about neurodiversity and social issues from a leftist autistic perspective. When I started my channel, it was 3 years ago. I was just turned 33. And I did so because I had just been diagnosed with autism. And that was quite a journey, and I wanted to talk about it. And I was studying philosophy at the time. And I saw a lot of intersections regarding the stuff that I was learning through my philosophy degree and the concept of neurodiversity, which I just think is a fascinating topic. It's a relatively new idea, and it's one that's just ripe for exploration and should and could change the way that we think about a lot of stuff. So that was my main goal, was to talk about philosophy and neurodiversity and how they interact with each other. And my channel has since branched out a bit since then. I'm also working on some other projects. But yeah, that's basically the story. Was I got diagnosed with autism later in life and wanted to talk about that on the internet.
Yeah, as one does these days.
Exactly.
I think I think we might actually be the same age. I'm 36. So that would, you said 3 years ago when you were 33. So we're the same age, twinsies.
1987 gang?
86.
Okay.
I guess I'm like 6 months older than you. All right.
Yeah, February 87.
So that is I want to get into the autism and neurodiversity
Mm.
stuff pretty heavy because like I also I have ADHD and we'll talk about some of the other stuff in a minute, but I want to actually touch on that a little bit about the getting into YouTube in your like
Mm.
30s because I did that as well, and there are several other creators who like I follow and like kind of travel in the same circles who did that, like FD, like Kalen Conrad, RIP Hoots. um,
Yeah, God rest her.
yeah, which if I don't know if we can give a Viking funeral to a Twitter account, but like that's my top pick. But who all those people you should check out, and their links will be in the down there part. But like it's weird, like getting into this space when you're like not, I mean, I think 30s is still young, but like people in their 20s don't think so. And it's I don't just like what has that been like for you? Because it's been like certain stuff for me, and I'm just curious about your side of it.
Yeah, it's a bit odd because obviously becoming a YouTuber is something that people typically do straight out of college.
Mhm.
I think it seems to me, and obviously a lot of the people that I follow who I've been inspired by are a lot younger than me. So it was weird trying to sort of work my way into that space, and I wasn't quite sure how well received I would be. It is nice to know that there are quite a few people in the same boat. I think all of the algorithm gang are in their 30s and started
Yeah.
their projects in the 30s. Um, but it's fun. I find it kind of youth bringing in a way to be so immersed in a space that is quite young.
Hmm.
I quite enjoy that. I think it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me learning. I'm at the kind of age where one might settle into certain things and ways. And so I think that joining, especially left wing political essay YouTube space, it my audience is young, not as young as some other creators, but it is a young space, and I find that to be quite vibrant and life bringing in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I've encountered the same thing. Like I've interviewed a lot of younger folks, and I'm just like blown away by how because like I'm admittedly I was an enormous dirtbag for most of my youth. Like I was a piece of shit,
Mm.
but like even for baseline teenager, but like the folks out here today are just like out here with full opinions and making sense, and just like I find myself like nodding along and like agreeing and like yeah, fuck yeah, y'all are doing. It's really impressive and like you said, like really invigorating. I find it really interesting, invigorating, just being around all these young folks who are like actually like trying to make the world a better place. I don't know. It makes me feel because there's like you said, there's a tendency to like settle down and like get in your own head and ways about
Yeah.
stuff as you get old, and it's nice being around people who are like, no.
No, we've no time for that. Sorry. Yeah, it's great. It's intimidating to meet 21-year-olds who know more about some of the stuff that I want to talk about than I do, and it's sort of like, oh, okay, no, I should learn from you, child. I, but no, it is exciting. It's intimidating and invigorating, as we've said. But yeah, I do, of course, worry about being cringe and being in such a young space and sort of making a fool of myself. But that's part of the game, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, gotta embrace the cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like I was online back when they were doing like rage comics and like I Can Has Cheeseburger. Like I was molded in the cringe. I didn't see a good joke until I was a grown man. Like or a good meme. Um,
I had quite a late start to discovering online spaces. I spent most of my 20s sort of traveling and working and being in different places and not having a smartphone. And I missed a lot of internet culture. I missed most of the early days of YouTube. I barely know what a Vine is. It like all the sort of older millennial kind of YouTube
Uh,
culture. I completely missed it. Have no
uh,
idea.
Maybe that's why your content's so good. You're not like brain poisoned from like, you did not miss a whole lot. Like I promise.
I learn about that stuff from like Gen Z commentary YouTubers who are like
Yeah.
talking about it in retrospect. It's like, oh, okay, that's what I missed, right? But I think like many people, I started watching political content and getting into sort of capital P politics around 2016. I think there was a big influx around 2016 of
Yeah.
people thinking that they need to start speaking out. They need to do something. They need to know what the hell is happening around here. And yeah, so it was about 2016 that I discovered the video essay, and I discovered that YouTube is more than how-to tutorials and TED Talks. Um, and that was quite exciting to watch these brave young leftists making their essays and putting them out into the world, being like some of the only voices speaking out against the overwhelming right wing orientated content that you find on YouTube
Yeah.
and the mainstream media. I remember when left wing media was non-existent. It was that one newspaper that you could only get in certain places, and there just was not left wing media.
Yeah. It's
And
like zines somebody would hand you on your way into a supermarket.
yeah, and you're like, what is this? Yeah, it just didn't exist. And so now we're in a position where there are young people complaining about the left wing media that is available to them. And I mean, that's the old person in me is like, well, you should be grateful, but it's great. It's good to be that you can be picky these days and you can have such high standards. And yeah, I think it's a brave new world, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I have I have the luxury of being like a not really a YouTuber. Like
Mm.
I literally just sit and have conversations with people, so I don't actually have to do any of the work y'all do. And I actually recently just uh, pulled all of the videos of the podcast that I had up because I had a couple that actually like took off and like got a lot of views, and I was like, ooh, I don't like that. I don't like that many people being able to know what I look like. So I decided to go to because the YouTube channel for me was kind of always an afterthought. I was just always wanted to do a podcast, and then I was like, well, I might as well put it up on YouTube, and then kind of snowballed from there. But I think I'm
Mm.
gonna go with just the audio because some of the stuff that I talk about on here and that I think you and I might wind up talking about is not exactly conducive to a successful career in particularly the corporate world, which I'm going to wind up in. Um,
Right.
so, um, so yeah, I kind of like I am in awe of like the amount of work that video essayists and YouTubers put in. Like I know several personally, and it's just the amount of work involved is just astounding that for a single person to pull off.
It is, and yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate that when they go in, obviously. But no, I've like my climate change video that just came out. I've been working on for most of this year. I would say if we count the reading and the research that goes in before I even start a script, yeah, then 6 7 months. That's been in the works. Yeah, it's wild amounts of work, and it's so much work for free. But I personally find it just so satisfying to see the finished product, and I'm leaving something for people, and that's wonderful to me. That's kind of why I'm here. Yes, I like very much that I am creating art that is being viewed by unknown strangers. And sometimes these strangers write to me and they tell me that I have given them words for things that they're experiencing themselves, and that I have allowed for them to communicate with their own support bases in a way that they have never been able to before, and have been able to access support through that, and community, and have been able to rebuild relationships because of that. And I mean, that's overwhelming to me. That really is a lot for me. One reason I did go into this channel was to better communicate with those around me. I wanted to talk about neurodiversity. I wanted to talk about autism. And one reason why I wanted to talk about those things was to communicate to my friends and family what things are like for me, how I experience things, to explain certain things. And for me, I personally lost my mother right at the beginning of my YouTube journey, in the same year that I started my channel. And so when I hear from people who have watched my videos telling me that I've allowed them to rebuild their relationships with their family, with their mothers, that's like all the inspiration, all the encouragement that I could possibly need to sit in this chair for hours and hours, hundreds of hours, creating these little YouTube videos.
Yeah, I mean that's huge. I actually your um, videos were pretty helpful to me as well. I
Oh.
found you while I was researching autism, and like I think several years ago, like right around when you first started your channel, and I've been a fan ever since. But so
Oh.
I was diagnosed with ADD as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't until like 4 years ago that I went back and reconfirmed a diagnosis so that I could get put on Adderall because I was going back to school and I was just having a huge, really difficult time studying. Um,
Mm.
and my my therapist was like, "So I can't like diagnose you unless you've taken the assessment screening." But you should really think about taking the autism assessment screening. And I was like, okay. Well, um, what would that do for me? And it's like, well, nothing practically. I was like, oh, okay.
Mm.
Well, I'm not going to worry about that. But it like put a bug in my brain where I started getting sort of thinking about that, and I'm probably going to go back and get like an actual diagnosis because I'm moving into like I'm going to try to get a work from home job, and like having that on my paperwork is probably helpful to maintaining that if
Mm.
people decide to yoink that. But I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years, like sort of investigating like neurodivergence as a subject and being like, oh, I have that and I do that. And is that why I did that as a
Mm.
kid? And um, it, so I'm like almost certain that I have autism as well, and like your channel was very helpful in, like you said, giving me the language to even ask the right questions. So I mean, you're talking to somebody who you helped personally.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so nice. Oh, that's why I do it. That's like the best feedback I ever get. It's not about how good the video was or how well I explored a topic. My favorite feedback is always like, "Oh, you've helped me understand myself,"
Mhm.
and that's just super cool because it took me a really long time to understand myself, and it was actually an autistic YouTuber talking about stimming actually that flicked the switch in my brain that was like, oh, what? So this isn't just an every person thing? Like, oh, okay. And that's quite funny actually that it was stimming, which was the thing that kind of sparked my interest in autism. Um, because I also think I probably also have ADHD. That's something that I'm currently going through assessment for. But yeah, when I did go for my assessment for autism, after having fought a little bit to get to that point against GPs, the psychologist said that I was a standard case of autism and she diagnosed me on the spot. I'm completely obviously autistic, absolute stereotype. Like, okay.
He actually diagnosed you on your way in from the parking lot.
Like I can see it from here. Yeah.
What would you say like the biggest thing for you in terms of getting across to people? What are you trying to get across to people in your work on that subject?
I think mainly it would be the idea of neurodiversity isn't well understood yet, especially beyond leftist circles. I think a lot of people still think of things like ADHD and ASD and also mental health issues as being these kind of easily definable, completely non vague, boxable things. And that brains are, there's a right way for a brain to be, and then there's atypicalness. There's weird ways for a brain to be. There's wrong ways or disordered ways, and neurodiversity kind of blows that idea apart. There are as many types of brain as there are people on this planet, and this is an idea that's supported by neuroscience, by what we understand of brains and how they work, and people and how they work. And it's still really not an understood concept. People don't understand that autism can be slightly vague, that it can fluctuate, that it can not just that it can look different from person to person, but within the same person over time, depending on their state, depending on their emotions, their well-being. People like to think of human nature and psychology and health and brains as these sort of things that we can define and work with. And I guess I'm a bit postmodern when it comes to thinking of this stuff. But it's true. It's true. We're not humans don't work in that way. It's easier to study people if they did work in that way. I can understand the incentive towards thinking of people like that. But in my opinion, the classical view of viewing neurology, of viewing mental health, of viewing human beings is entirely tied up with sort of very traditional kind of monotheistic conceptions of human nature, which we know the right wing still love to cling to. Very essentialist thinking. That's the word I'm looking for. And yeah, I mean, the idea of neurodiversity is essentially non-essentialist. It's entirely non-essentialist. It depathologizes difference. That's what it is essentially to me, is depathologizing difference. A lot of people have said to me since I got diagnosed that, why would you want to label yourself? You've made it this far. You're in your 30s. Why would you want an autism label? Isn't that limiting? And for me, it's that's just the way you're looking at it, isn't it? That's a negative perception of what autism is. You're pathologizing autism by questioning that. For me, it's an adjective. It's an explanation. It tells the world how my brain works. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be disabling. It very often is disabling. But then we have to get into this whole discussion about disability, social model, etc. But But just the idea of neurodiversity, it's not understood, it's new. The idea of there being an autism rights movement of civil rights for neurodivergent people is brand new. That's completely brand new. That's not on most people's radars. And so to be able to push that, to be able to advertise this amazing idea that explains so much, that depathologizes so much, that I think, and it applies to everyone. Neurodiversity applies to everyone. It's a description of all brains being diverse.
Yeah.
And I'm just a complete evangelist for the idea of neurodiversity.
The one of the ways that, like, I like the way that you phrase that. It was not a pathological thing, but it's just an adjective.
Yeah.
Because the way that I've thought about like specifically the ADHD symptoms that I have, and I functioned very, very well in my previous profession for a
Mm.
decade. I was a paramedic, and I was like, every symptom of ADHD that I had made me better at that job.
Mm.
Like, I was really good at it, and I was really good at it because I was able to bounce around really effectively without, like, constantly moving from one thing to the other in terms of, like, analyzing what's around me, and then if I need to, like, really drill down into something important, I can pretty quickly, like, do the hyper focus thing on something when
Mm.
the adrenaline's pumping. It made me very effective at that profession. I did have a problem remembering numbers and stuff, but that's what a pen in the back of your glove is for. um, but that neurological framework is really piss poor for sitting down and learning stuff out of a book that's like rote
Yeah.
memorization. And so that's when I started to have to take Adderall, was when I was trying to and still trying to learn a new skill based off of like a technical textbook manual, because I
Mm.
can't get through it. But if you put me in a situation where I'm actually having to, like, do the things, I excel. And it's not like a good or bad thing. It's just I'm good at certain things naturally, and I'm less good at certain things naturally than you would be, or like somebody
Yeah.
else would be. And it just so happens to have that um, that suite of the constellation of, I don't necessarily even know if, like, in the terms that we're speaking, symptoms would be an appropriate word, but like characteristics,
Traits, usually.
traits. Yeah,
Yeah.
like they slot you into certain activities where you're going to perform very well, and you'll perform
Mm.
less well at other things. But that's true of anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And a lot, when I do talk about autism, you get a lot of neurotypical, or not necessarily neurotypical, but not autistic people commenting, saying, oh, I do that. Oh, I do this a bit. Oh, I also relate to this. And it, that's true. And it doesn't undermine the difficulties that autistic people face. There are in existence people who would tick all the boxes for autism and who probably wouldn't get diagnosed because it doesn't impact their life in much of a negative way that's necessary for a diagnosis. And there, if you've got a job that suits you, you've got a friendship group that suit you, you've got a life, you've been able to craft a life for yourself that suits you in every way, you're probably not going to have that many difficulties. And this is the social model of disability in a nutshell, really.
Yeah.
Um, but there are also limits to that model, because there will always be, especially with like something like ADHD, for example, you want to do something, you want to focus on something, but you can't control where your attention is at that moment, and that's disabling for you in that moment. It's not really anything to do with the social structure, it's about your own personal desires and being able to do what you want to do.
I think I remember there was a meme that was going around on I think it was Twitter, but it was like there's a question on the autism assessment test where it's like, do you have difficulty with like social interaction or reading social cues? And it's like the actual diagnostic criteria should be if you respond to that by saying, because it's either a yes or no question, and it's like every person with autism is like, no, I don't have a problem with that. I've spent years building a system to deal with that. It's like
I
I'm really
have
competent at that.
diagrams, you see.
Yeah, I have this whole chart. I have like a 10 gig database in my brain for what every specific thing a person might do means in terms of the rules that you all have. And I've built it up over a very long, awkward childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is something that I love to talk about on my channel is how autistic people learn stuff. Because it's a different way of learning, and it fascinates me because I mean I've always learned this way, and I didn't quite realize that not everybody does. And so yeah, I made my first actually ever video that I ever made was on facial expressions, and about autistic facial expression recognition and the difficulties that autistic people face in reading people and recognizing emotions in others, and how this is thought to be a typical autism trait that they can't do it and other people can do it. And actually, people can't. Most people can't read other people. Research has shown that people are pretty rubbish at reading emotions simply through nonverbal communication, like body language and facial expressions. Um, Actually, Mooncat did a really good video debunking body language experts where she touches on this. The research that said that facial expressions are universal, a smile anywhere in the world means happiness, a frown anywhere in the world means anger. That research was shaky at best, extremely shaky, and has been blown out of the water in recent years. And what people do when they read other people is more about reading context and the situation rather than just their face. And so I find that when we're talking about autistic people, if autistic people knew that that's what you're supposed to do as well, instead of thinking that there's emotion lying in a face somewhere,
Mhm.
then it's a different method. But autistic people learn with intent,
Mhm.
and so I find that autistic people are able to read people if they are if they're aware that there isn't a an emotion somewhere in the face that you need to try and like tease out or figure out. That's actually not how it works. Non-autistic people or neurotypical people, they pick up on the context just through osmosis. They don't really think about what they're picking up on at any given time,
Mhm.
whereas an autistic brain is more aware of having to pick up on certain things, or that they are picking up on certain things. There's a lot less learning through osmosis, sort of unconscious learning going on.
Yeah.
And so it just needs to be a bit more direct. And I just find that really, really interesting that it's not necessarily a deficit. It's more just you need to take a different approach.
Yeah. I actually have found, personally, because before I got into EMS, I was in sales, and
Oh,
like I was a telemarketer.
okay.
I was one of those awful people. But I am actually like I don't do the osmosis thing, and I actually have really poor what I think most people would describe as empathy, and I'm not sure if that's the
Mm,
correct term, but it's like the mirror neurons, like, I see you suffering and I feel your suffering personally, like, I don't really
mm.
have that, but I do have very high sympathy, like, I understand that somebody's in pain and I want to alleviate it, I just don't feel it myself,
Yeah.
And I found that I'm actually at this point much better than most people uh, at figuring out how somebody else is feeling, because like I've just gotten so good at intentionally observing all of the context around it, and it's in like very minute detail, that
Yeah.
I'm I have a better gauge of how somebody else is feeling most of the time than I think most other people who do it sort of like naturally, and that's just born of repetition and skill. So it's just interesting how various people arrive at certain things like that, like you said.
Yeah, that really is. Yeah, and it's exactly kind of what I was saying. You know that you need to pick up on certain things in order to read people, whereas other people might just go, "Oh, it's something that happens. It just comes naturally to you. You just know or you don't know if someone's happy or sad based on their face." No, not quite. And autistic people are like, I talk a lot as well about how, neurotypical people are extremely bad at reading autistic people and how they're feeling because we might not express our emotions in a typical way either. And that's like there's actually a thing known within neurodiversity as the double empathy problem.
Mm.
Don't know if you've heard of that.
No, I'm not familiar. What is it?
It's essentially the idea that autistic people struggle with empathy is a very one-sided view.
Hmm.
It's actually more the case of autistic people and non-autistic people struggling to empathize with each other,
Hmm.
and it kind of works both ways. And this also plays out regarding the social communication issues that autistic people face. These are reduced significantly if the autistic person is in a group of other autistic people.
Hmm.
And so it just shows that things aren't so one-sided as to these are the people whose brains are different to what a normal brain should be. It's way more of a two-way street, and communication is an interactive thing. It's not just one person communicating and another person communicating. It's interactive. Your communication changes as you communicate, and it seems more that it's people of different neurotypes struggling to communicate with each other rather than it being this kind of one-sided, it's the autistic person that has the problems.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Interesting.
double
Yeah.
empathy problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that, but that does sound interesting. I've not spent a lot of time around other people who, at least that I'm aware, have autism. So like I wouldn't, I've never been in a
Mm.
situation where I would be able to personally gauge the efficacy of that. But that does sound interesting. It would make some sense, right? Like you're more
Yeah.
easily to relate to people who are similar to you.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
seems common sense enough, doesn't it?
yeah. The one thing that you said a second ago that I think bears some drilling down into and repeating is you said you're part of what you do in your project, and the thing that you're interested in is um, people who are have who are part of this neurodiversity community sort of speaking for themselves and talking about their own experiences, whereas previously it had been other like neurotypical people speaking on their behalf.
Hmm.
um, and I think it bears, without spending too much time on the negative, I do think it bears mentioning that a lot of the public advocacy groups, or so-called public advocacy groups
Mm.
for autism and uh, other neurodiversity conditions, are really, really awful. Like
Yes,
specifically, Autism Speaks and their ilk are,
specifically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know
Screw
if you have
those
any
guys in particular.
yeah, and I don't know if you have any like thoughts on that in particular, but it is something that I think about, because anytime anybody who isn't just neck deep in the online neurodiversity discourse mention, like if I encounter somebody in the wild, like who mentions this sort of stuff, some advocacy group of that nature is usually not that far behind. They have like pretty good market saturation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Ooh, I have thoughts. Yeah. Oh, do I? Yeah. It's so. I think the term neurodiversity was only coined in the 90s, and I believe that Autism Awareness Month has only existed since 2007. I could be wrong. I think it's 2007. So it is autism advocacy is a relatively new concept. And up until extremely recently, and I'm talking within the past 10 years, yeah, extremely recently, it was entirely the domain of parents of autistic kids, and big charities like Autism Speaks. And I mean, the issues with Autism Speaks, like that's a whole podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that goes deep, and I mean, just look it up. It's horrendous. Some of the things that they have put out in under the guise of autism advocacy, it's like it's sickening to me.
Yeah.
It's dehumanizing a lot of it. There's the famous video of the founder talking about her autistic daughter who is in the room at the time, and she's talking about how she wanted to murder her daughter in front of her daughter, as
Yeah.
if she's not there. She's not really a person. She doesn't understand. This and this is the one of the gold standard kind of autism advocacy groups up until extremely recently. And they get inordinate amounts of funding. They go to war with autistic advocates. So it's not just like they're out of touch.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that this is an old group. They're a bit out of touch. They're not saying the right things. They actively push against a lot of what the autistic community is trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of money behind this. There's the autism industrial complex is a phrase that people use now. ABA alone in the United States, that's applied behavior analysis, which is still seen in the United States as the gold standard for treatment for autism, which is based on behaviorist psychology and has the same roots as conversion therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the EU, it's falling out of favor, but in the United States, it's still big business. And there is big business behind these advocacy groups, and they rope in celebrities as their spokespeople. And yeah, it's a constant battle. And come Autism Awareness Month, like autistic people, all the ones that I know, dread that month approaching.
Yeah.
Because it's a constant battle against messaging that is either very harmful and dangerous, or just like not what we're saying at all,
Yeah.
and just in support of a business essentially, and an industry, and vested interests in a certain way of thinking about people and neurodivergency.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm like getting my tinfoil hat on, but I do see links. I see links between the way that the right wing like to talk about human nature and essentialist conceptions of how people should be, and these groups and this language surrounding neurodiversity. There
Yeah.
is an anti-neurodiversity movement.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah.
Yeah. I would even go so far as to say some of it is just outright eugenicist.
It is.
Like,
It
yeah.
is. Yeah. Yeah. It very much is. The idea of their sort of their being studies done for a cure and things like this. I don't myself talk too much about that, but you listen to autistic people, some of them would maybe like to not have some of their traits. Others wouldn't want any kind of cure. It's a complicated thing, but the language surrounding the research groups and the people who fund them behind finding a cure is inherently dehumanizing and eugenicsy, in my opinion.
Like I wouldn't be opposed to like like for instance with my ADHD, when I know that I'm going to have to do some like boring ass neurotypical shit, I can just take a pill and like be good to go. Like that would be nice for some of the other stuff that I have for which there is not a pill. But I also kind of like me when I'm by myself. I don't know that I'd want to change too much about me permanently. So it would be nice if there were like I'm not opposed to well, it's like with anything in our current capitalist hellscape, where like the problem is not the thing itself; it is the tendrils of this sort of global hegemonic evil shit that infiltrates everything that we do. Where it's capitalism, it's this essentialist view of humanity, it's this pick another big bad thing that seems to be just the global right wing ecosystem just dips its fingers into everything and turns things that would or could be very good into things that are deeply fucked up and at times eugenicist and what have you. So yeah, it's a very it is a thing that we're not going to unpack in this short little segment
No,
because
we
it's
couldn't.
the thing that I find personally the most, I don't want to say the most galling because there's plenty to be galled about with autism speaks, but the thing that I find, one of the things that I find really that makes me mad is, and it pertains to that, where it's weaponizing things for which there are legitimate places of concern and empathy, is they always show how difficult it is for the parents. And I think that there is room, like I was a very difficult child, and I think there's room for empathy for parents who are having to do things that other parents don't have to do.
Yeah.
But that should not turn into my child is an object of suffering for me. And
Exactly.
that turns into this little nexus point of you get like people like Autism Speaks who are advocating purely on behalf of the parent and like treating the children as these objects of, fountains of misery for their family. And then on the other side of that, you get people who are very angry about that, who are, at times you'll see people saying that like, things so like far that like the parents shouldn't even be complaining. And it's just, I think there's a lot of missed opportunity for empathy there because the advocacy movement is tied up in pushing this specific narrative for which there's a lot of funding. And it just makes me sad.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. And you're absolutely right. That's why it's there. It's because there is an industry that is catered to struggling parents, and they are. I mean, they're being dishonest because the science behind there is no science behind ABA. It's pseudoscience.
Mm-hmm.
It's ineffective, and it's ineffective at best, and at worst, it can be torturous and inhumane. Um, and you don't. I don't think you get parents willing to put their kids through that unless they have been scared out of their minds by a tragedy narrative. But there is hope, I think, because like, I'm a member of some Facebook groups which are there. There's autistic people there, and there's parents of autistic kids, and there's just people who know autistic people. But the point of the group is that autistic people answer the questions about autism. And, you do get parents in there and they're struggling with their young children and they need help, and they do need help. And, for the sake of the kid, for the sake of the parent, help is required. And in my experience, autistic advocates are more than willing to accept and that it is difficult if you're not autistic to raise an autistic child, even if you are autistic. It's a difficult thing to try and understand an autistic kid, especially if they are they don't they're nonverbal in some capacity, or they don't vocalize their feelings. But yeah, in my experience, autistic advocates are absolutely more than willing to spend their time with parents to help them through these struggles and do show empathy towards the struggles. And unless the language is of a kind of, woe is me for having this kid. And obviously that's going to get backs up. That's going to annoy autistic adults, especially autistic adults who've maybe been through similar things. But I think there is space for that, for actually autistic adults to help and to be a guiding force and a source of support for people who know autistic people, for parents of young autistic children, without those sort of semi-corporate middlemen who want to be the voice and the ones who make the infographics and the ones who create the focus grouped message. And there's no need for them. There's zero need for them, except to make money for themselves and a harmful ABA industry. And we could just do without them, and we should.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll. I think that's a good spot to leave that on. Is just fuck them. Which, speaking
in the
of
bin.
yes, speaking of fuck them, I think the next thing on our list that we wanted to touch on was specifically you've done a lot of advocacy for trans rights, and specifically have gone to lengths to like go against like the predominant like TERF narratives and stuff. And I was just wondering, I'm always curious when I see other cis folks doing advocacy for that and in that space, and I'm curious like what your thoughts are about what it means to be a cis person who I'm sorry if I'm you are a cis person, right?
Yeah
Okay. I didn't want to like put my foot in my mouth or like that would be a bad way to start that conversation. But I'm always curious like where cis folks who are active in that fight see themselves and how they see themselves, because that's a big sort of ongoing conversation about like we just said, we want to like listen to autistic people, we want to listen to the people who we're talking about, they should be the predominant voices, but that doesn't mean that people who are advocates for that should necessarily like not do anything.
Back.
Yeah. So like I'm just interested in like anybody who's out there doing that and like what your feelings are on that and how you operate in that space.
Yeah, well, like I don't know how much I've done. Like I made a couple of videos. Like I, especially as a cis woman, it's people like me who the GC people, the gender critical TERF, transphobic groups are claiming that they're speaking for specifically. Yeah, I'm a cis woman. I've been victim to sexual assault and domestic abuse, and I'm autistic. They love to talk about autistic women like that. I'm going to be making a video about gender criticals being incredibly ableist as well. But no, that I'm the exact kind of person that they are claiming to speak for. And so for a long time, I was sort of, I wondered whether I should make content on that subject. I won't make too much content on that subject because I'm very, very aware of taking up space. Of I don't want people to watch my videos instead of listening to a trans person or subscribing to a trans channel. Absolutely not. But when these people are claiming to be speaking on my behalf, I will not let it stand. I cannot let it stand. I simply cannot allow for the press and for the wider public to be fed a framing that is essentially it's trans women versus cis women. And there's a debate happening between trans women and cis women. And that is what they're trying to accomplish. That's what gender critical groups want people to think. And I won't have it. I couldn't not speak out about that. And I put a lot of work into those videos. I took a lot of time over them. I consulted on the script. I sent it away to some of my trans friends and people who actually have expertise in some of the fields that I talked about, especially in my video on female-only spaces, because I've done 2 videos. One is about how gender critical ideology is anti-feminist because it's biological essentialism. And another one on female-only spaces, which is debunking some of the things that these gender critical groups are saying about female-only spaces. And I consulted with people who are somewhat experts in the field of like abuse and domestic violence shelters and who have worked in some of these spaces. So I was incredibly careful, and I think we need to be incredibly careful. And yeah, it's like what I say with autism advocacy, like autistic people at the front in the center, but that doesn't mean you can just leave us to it and step back. Like, right, off you go. No, absolutely not. And these people are claiming to be speaking for women's rights. Their whole argument is we are for women's rights, and you need women to speak out and say, no, absolutely you are not. You are, I'm going to get angry. You are damaging and undermining anything that women have fought for and achieved. Anything that like the historical feminist movement has achieved, you are working to undermine. And they're incredibly well funded. They have a huge reach. They I don't know, like normal people, like British people, like, I say normal people as in like not online people in the UK would look at J.K. Rowling and I think would think that's like a liberal celebrity lady, probably quite nice, seems all right, normal person. If she's domestic violence victim, if she's talking about women's rights, she's probably in good faith talking about women's rights. There needs to be more women and speaking out against that. Or everyone needs to speak out against that. But yeah, I'm getting annoyed just thinking about it.
That sort of mentality, kind of like the thought process that you just described, is sort of like how I approach it as well, which is I tend to, if I want to talk, well, I don't make video essays, so it's a little different, but like if I want to talk about, say, race issues, like I'll usually have somebody who is of the community on my show to speak about that. Or if I want to talk about trans issues, I'll bring somebody on from that community to speak on my show. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to avoid discussing them where it's appropriate and where my voice as a, working class cis white dude would have value in terms of pushing back against the perceived ownership of my demographic by the right-wing evil, like merchants of evil that currently operate in the world. And so that's kind of, it is admittedly very much a balancing act, right? Because you don't want to be somebody who's talking over and for people, but you also don't want to surrender the space that you have a legitimate claim to the bad people either.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I land on it as well. It sounds like you're of a similar mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I would be primary recruiting material for gender criticals. I'm their target audience, essentially. And yeah, so I have to push against that with what little I can. Luckily, quite a lot of people saw those videos. I was more than I expected.
They were
And
good. They were very good.
I got a lot of good feedback from trans people that I trust. Um, and so I'm happy with what I did there. I probably have 2 more videos on the subject of gender criticals, which will come out next year. And I think after that I'll have said what I came to say.
Mhm.
And obviously, with each one, I'm linking to completely trans only other references and other YouTubers and research and content and things that people should go and check out. I usually make a resources document with every video. Um, and yeah, so I think 2 more videos, and that will be me having said my piece. And I think it would be good if more people said their piece, and then stepped back and handed the mic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's a you can button that up into a nice little clip there.
Nice.
That sounded pretty good. I think I'm in complete agreement. So that leaves the last thing that I think we wanted to talk about, which is the end of the world as we know it, which you have just released a video on. Though by the time this interview comes out, it'll have been a little while since it came out.
Yeah.
But yes, the apocalypse. Thoughts?
Just to wrap up the podcast, the
Yeah.
end of the world. Yeah. So the video that I just released is a follow up to a video I released last year, which was debunking soft climate change denial. So that's people who agree that climate change is a thing that is happening, that is caused by humans, but that deny it in other ways. So I talked about conscious consumerism, the idea that we can consume our way out of this crisis. I talk about futurism, the idea that we can tech our way out of this crisis. I talk about the competitive views that people hold, which is sort of, like, oh, China and India are emitting more than us, so we don't have to do anything until they stop, and that kind of mentality that some people have. And I talk about doomerism right at the end.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of people enjoyed that video, but they wanted more solutions. Uh, they wanted some hope, I believe. And so I read How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. I don't know if you've read that one.
I've not read it, but I've seen a lot of like videos and summaries about it. I'm fairly. I think I can probably follow.
Yeah, well versed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I recommend it. It's not very long. It's a great little book. And so yes, my recent video is about solutions
Hmm.
because yeah, the world is ending. We we have missed the boat when it comes to saving what we had.
Hmm.
And I think that's a bitter pill for most people to swallow. It can lead to a lot of fatalism. It can lead to a lot of doomerism. It needn't, and that's the point of my video: is that it needn't. Um, there is still hope. There are still things that can be done, with a lot of caveats. Because we've been talking about things that we can do, and there's things that we can do for 30, 40 years now. It's kind of time to start doing them
Yeah.
in a way. And I think there's a lot of confusion, and I think there's so many things that we can do. There's almost too many that I think that people kind of get lost. And so the point of my video was to try and just give a list, essentially, of stuff that I think might be good. But the video starts off by a discussion of property sabotage, which is the theme of the book that I based it on. And should we be viewing sabotage as self-defense?
Mm.
And that's the fundamental idea addressed by Andreas Malm. And my view, in case you couldn't guess, is yes. Yes, we should. Absolutely, we should. And it is, in fact. And we need to reconceptualize how we look at direct action on a large scale. I think there's a lot of radical leftists out there who don't really need convincing of this, but for the wider environmentalist movement, they absolutely do need convincing of this. And for sort of most liberals or just sort of remotely progressive, non-far leftist types out there, might view blowing up a pipeline as a red line, as something you absolutely shouldn't do. And we need to change the way we think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So without saying anything that will get my channel removed, I am probably a bit more militant than Malm is. And the way I conceptualize this is, what would you like? So they made that movie, like Don't Look Up, which I didn't see it, but I'm familiar with the concept. And it's like, what if that were actually happening, right? Like, what if there was a civilization or species ending event approaching with certainty that you could see through a telescope, and there were a million people who ran industries that profited by not doing anything to fix that issue, and there's physical infrastructure in place that allows for that profit to be generated. Like, what would you be willing ethically to do to save the species, right? If you believe that violence is acceptable in to defend yourself personally, then it follows that it's acceptable to defend the entirety of the species. Like, I don't see it. Like, unless you're an absolute pacifist, then perhaps the only time violence is acceptable is in preservation of the possibility of the continued human experience. So it's a like, I don't actually, and maybe I'm so far gone at this point into like terminal leftism that I don't even know how to have a conversation with somebody who would balk at what I just said. Like, I don't understand them enough anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And like, as insofar as what you said about violence, like Mom makes that point of like, we need to ditch pacifism. It needs to not be a consideration anymore. Insofar as harm towards people, it's usually a bit of a red line, and we won't go into that, or you probably will get your channel flagged. But violence, again, because traditionally property destruction is considered to be violent, and so violence in that aspect is not just a thing we should consider, but is a necessity. It's an absolute, a must, an absolute must.
Yeah, and I would actually argue is probably, and there's debates on all sides, and we probably shouldn't have the debate because my channel will get killed. But I think that violence against property is probably more, just all ethics aside, it's just more affectatious than violence against people, because we don't live in a monarchy. Like, the system of global capital is such that if you could make a list of the 10,000 people that are the most responsible for perpetuating the system, and you could like Thanos snap your finger and get rid of them, tomorrow there would be 10,000 more to take their place.
Exactly.
And like the idea of specific targeted political violence on individuals, to a certain extent, in my mind, reifies this sort of like great man theory that our current system operates on. And really, the most effective way to do that is to disrupt the infrastructure that any of those people, whether themselves or their replacements, would use to continue to perpetuate the system. So it's not even an ethical argument on my side. It's just what works.
It's necessary. You can't be a CEO if there's no company infrastructure to be a CEO of, can you?
Yeah.
Get rid of the CEO. The CEO will be replaced. As you say, and that's actually a really interesting point. What you say about the sort of the great man theory of like it's people and we just need to get rid of these certain people. Like, no, it's not. It's systems, it's things, it's ways of doing stuff that we need to, we need to seize the means. But yeah, we need to do as much as we can, I think, to physically prevent the harmful practices which are destroying our ecosystems. And as well, you need lawyers and you need politicians doing other stuff and regulatory work. And I make that point in my video. We need to do everything. We're at the stage of just throw everything at it. Like do anything you possibly can. And if you're a politician, do politician stuff. If you're a lawyer, do lawyer stuff. But in towards the goal of climate action and justice. Everyone, I think, at this stage needs to have that in mind all the time.
Yeah.
It can't just be one of many subjects. It is an asteroid heading to. If there was an asteroid heading to Earth, we wouldn't be talking about anything else.
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit more cynical than that. I think it would probably play out exactly like the movie did. But so I'm actually like and this may be where we sort of like differ on our philosophies, but I'm what I like to call. Are you familiar with the term pastel goth?
No.
So it's like you're a goth person, but you like pastel colors. Like it's basically it's essentially, yeah. So it's basically just like you're a goth, but like you just like brighter colors, but everything else about you like slots perfectly into like the goth subreddit or the not subreddit. Well, maybe subreddit, but subculture. Yeah. I'm what I like to refer to as a pastel doomer. I actually don't have a lot of hope for our future. I don't think that we're like, I'm just realistic assessment of what I know, what I see in the world. I don't think we're going to get very far, but I am of the mind of like, what the fuck else are we going to do but try? Right? Like,
yes.
like we're probably not going to succeed, but like there's literally no other hill to die on other than this one. So you might as well run up it. Like, what are you going to, like, what else are you going to do?
Yeah. I make the point in my video, without giving too much away about like how I set them up, I use characters in these ones to have sort of like conversations about this stuff. So I do a lot of character work. And in this one, the me character, the one that is me as a YouTuber, is going through a bit of an existential crisis regarding that. So like the understanding that this is huge. This is like everything needs to change. This is insurmountable. It's like fighting a titan. We are not special. We are a temporary blip in the chaos of the universe. And oh my God. And yeah, and it's a very real feeling. And maybe we are right. Maybe we are all doomed. It seems quite likely at this point, but yeah, what is the point of talking about that? What is the point of being like, oh, well, nothing to be done? But there might be, there is still a chance.
Yeah.
While there is still a chance that, like, and one of the writers that Mom cites, Wallace Wells, I believe. I probably won't find the quote if I go looking for it now, but he says basically that there is always a chance. Until we are extinct, there is always a chance. There is always hope. There is always the fact that no matter how warm it gets, it will always be the case that the next decade could contain more suffering or less.
Yeah.
And that's kind of in our power in a way. In a way, but we have to reconceptualize how we think of power, how we think of our own abilities within society, how we view these monsters and these titans, these systems. I don't know, that boat that got lodged in was it the Suez Canal?
Yeah.
That messed things up for a while, you know.
Yeah.
that was a big thing. I believe there is scope for coordinated efforts. But the thing is, these efforts, by definition, will have to be organized in a somewhat covert way.
Yeah.
Which, might lead to a lot of people thinking that there's nothing being done and no one's really doing anything that's effective. But a lot of the time, it's like you're not really hearing about it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what Mom's book successfully does, is like, there are people doing this stuff. Like, not enough people,
Yeah.
nowhere near enough people, but there are people who are doing things that could actually have
I
serious ramifications.
I, for one, am just thoroughly shocked that the three big news companies whose major stakeholders are like General Electric and Boeing and Raytheon and various oil conglomerates are not reporting on the actions that are being taken out to undermine the infrastructure of those companies. I
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine why they wouldn't want to discuss that in depth.
No.
Yeah, it's like, and like I think some of the better like indie news sources just got nuked on Twitter like yesterday and
Mm-hmm.
didn't get brought back. But yeah, there are people doing things.
This is why
It's
I emphasize the importance of community building, and I know that's community is a favorite word among leftists, but for a reason,
mhm,
um, because it's that it's uh, we have to go beyond the traditional means of getting this information. We have to not trust systems anymore. We can't rely on politics to get out of this. We can't rely on economics to get us out of this, or market forces, or whatever. Like, we cannot. We have to circumnavigate that. And I think the only way that we do that is through rapid community building and acceptance of the reality of our position in the world and our power within it. Because we are many and they are quite few.
yeah. And the other thing that I have personally encountered with people, there's two big hurdles for like the normies that I regularly encounter. The first is, well, actually, I won't. We'll make that the second one because it's the biggest hurdle in my opinion. But the one is the this idea that you have to take the entire movement on your shoulders, and if you personally are not the one who like lays waste to the entire pumping substructure by yourself and stands on the ramparts with a flag that you're not
Yeah.
doing anything. It's like, nah, man, just like donate some food to Food Not Bombs or something. Like they'll feed somebody who's gonna, like they're
Yeah.
like they're nobody's asking you to become the next messiah. Like people are asking you
Exactly.
to get involved in whatever way you have the capacity to get involved. I think you say this at the start of your
Yeah.
most recent video, which is ought implies can,
Hmm.
which I really like the way you put that. So like just do whatever you're able to do, then that's what you do. Nobody's asking you to do anything more than
No, no, exactly. Nobody is. And like there's something of that kind of great man theory in the reaction to it, like, oh, I have to be, I have to be the one holding the flag on the ramparts. Like, well, that's revolutions are not just a group of people went and did a revolution one day and succeed. Like, that's not how they
that.
go. Like,
Yeah,
that's not what happens. I make the point of saying, if you're waiting for a revolution instead of doing revolutionary things, you're
yeah,
you're not doing anything. Like,
yeah,
you you're absolutely just sitting back and not helping in any way.
yeah. I would encourage
Ooh,
people to look up the history of the Viet Minh and Viet Cong in that regard, because we have a lot of documented
oh,
history of like how they start, like whether or not you specifically agree with their politics and methodology, like is neither here nor there. But you're talking about a group of people who spent like decades very slowly building a revolutionary movement within their own country to kick the colonizers out, and they were successful. And they didn't start a guerrilla war overnight. Like they started by stockpiling food and like training people and teaching folks to read and like all these other
mm,
things that you don't really think about as being like glorious revolutionary
hmm,
behavior. The bulk of what led to their success was all that stuff. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so
Networks, community, decentralization is like a big topic. It's a big like it's a broad term. Um, And I think it's a key term because currently things are very centralized, and some of the most revolutionary work, I think, is to decentralize grids. And by that, I mean food, energy, water, all the necessary things for life
mhm.
uh, should be organized in a decentralized manner, and there are people working to do that, and that in itself, it undermines the power that systems have over us, and it reduces the need to rely on them to do anything for us.
Yeah,
And that this is how we overthrow capitalism. We undermine it from below. We're not going to get a huge group of people together to go and get all the capitalists one day.
yeah,
That's it's a fantasy. That's it's impossible. It's community, and it's community is it's to do with survival as well. I'm kind of thinking in a kind of long term way of like, what if we don't do enough? What if things get bad? Things might get bad.
hmm,
Like, systems may very well collapse.
hmm.
And then there's a little bit of a prepper in me that's, like, we kind of need to prepare for
Yeah,
that quite possible eventuality. I know preppers in general are quite sort of libertarian,
yeah,
strange people who never seem to be concerned with climate change.
yeah.
They always have their like individual apocalypse that they're preparing for, and none of it is ever
Uh,
climate change.
well, you're talking to a low key climate change prepper.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I have and I'll actually like this is a good spot to just talk about like this. And this is what I think if you have the means, you should do. Which is so I buy like I do meal prep and like part of my meal prep every day, once a week, I make a big pot of brown rice, lentils, and quinoa. And I just mix them all together, and I just eat like 7 or 8 ounces of that per meal, with other stuff like veggies and like what have you. But I buy all that stuff in bulk, and it's cheaper that way. And when like I have a bucket of each, like a big paint bucket, that's food grade. And when it gets halfway full, I buy another 25-pound bag and I put it at the bottom. And so I always have like 25 pounds of each of those in my closet because I eat it every day. So it's the most cost effective way to do it. And each one if that food store is enough, if I only ate that, I would have a good protein and carbohydrate mix to my food. And I have enough food to feed like 10 people for 6 months, if I can boil water. And then I have a couple of really good first aid kits. And then I have, if you're in a place where you're legally able to own weapons, I have um, a, a long gun and a pistol and enough ammo for the members of my household to defend. Like, if I live around a lot of fascists. um, so like that has influenced my purchasing, but it's not like I don't have like a bunker. I have a closet, like a very small closet filled with what I like to think of as like Hurricane Katrina took out New Orleans, and there were fascists hunting black people in the streets for sport. I don't want that to happen in my community the next time something bad happens and it takes a little longer to get like the return of civil order. Or what if civil order is never restored?
Yes.
And so what I think you should do, to prepare for not just climate change, but just like political instability, is get to know your neighbors, plug in with your local community, plug in with your local left-wing activist community, and then just everybody who has the ability have enough stuff for just very low level defensive stuff. Like, I don't have like tens of thousands of rounds of ammo. I have enough for like a day of fighting, and then have enough food for you and your household and one or two other households for like a month or two, which isn't a lot of food. Like, that's like $100 worth of grain. And just keep that stockpile up because, you should probably be eating it anyway because it's healthy. And then some medical stuff, like a little small, like the amount of prepper stuff I have fits, if you stack it on top of each other, fits in a 4 by 4 foot square foot, like, column, right? It's like a closet. And if everybody in your network did that, the next time something bad happens and you're set, right? You can, that if you've built community networks, well, now you have a way to feed everybody and distribute food to people who can't feed themselves. And you have a way to protect yourselves from the sort of people who are going to look at an incident like that as an excuse to go enact their violent fantasies on their marginalized neighbors. That's what I do. And that's what I encourage people to do.
That's great. That actually reminds me of a comment that I got on my video. Someone said that they had the idea to, because they want to get more involved in community organizing and sort of networking with their neighbors, their immediate community. And they said that, like, they live in a bit of a conservative area. Climate change isn't going to be the message that organizes people. But storm preparedness might be.
Yeah.
And so, like, just talk about the weather then. Talk about the increasing storms. If climate change is not the message that's going to convince people, not having their house flooded might be. Like, so that was a nice comment that I got. I have a bit of a prepper mentality, although I have not prepped. I've prepped nothing. I was caught in a flood in Thailand. I lived in Thailand briefly. And it was one of the worst floods on record. And I was shocked to my core at how quickly the shops ran out of food and water, and how vulnerable that then made me. and it was one of those kind of life-changing moments. I only got through that because of my neighbors showing me where I could find drinking water, helping me bring back the drinking water, like because the state was kind of helping with supplies, but me being a foreigner, I hadn't got like the memos, so I was kind of out on my own. Yeah, my neighbors really, really stepped up to help me through that, and it was, yeah, it was a real illustration of how vulnerable and reliant we are. And here I'm living in Berlin at the minute. There's community gardens everywhere. There's allotments. There's food, what you call it, like community fridges, and this kind of thing. Yeah, it's survival at the end of the day, even if it's not going to prevent the worst happening. It's still undermining the systems that govern us. It still undermines the hold that capital has over our lives if we are more prepared, if we are more able to provide for ourselves. Yeah, I think the left shouldn't be too afraid of prepper language, even though there is the kind of fringe section of preppers out there who I think are just looking forward to getting to shoot people.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're not. I'm surrounded by those people, and that has informed my decisions about what I prepare for.
Okay.
I actually like once knew a dude who like bought a school bus and buried it in out like he owned a farm and he buried it on his
Right.
property, like like that scene in like Breaking Bad where they have like the meth
Yeah.
labs, but he filled it with like surplus guns and ammunition like that. Like I've met those kind of dudes. Don't be that guy, but but what you
You
should
can't
do,
eat bullets.
yeah. I would say like, yeah, like have enough. If you do have weapons, have enough ammo for like one or two loadouts for whatever you can carry, and that's all you really need. Everything else should be training because that's what matters. But
We
in
don't have
terms,
those here.
yeah, and most people probably are not in a situation where that's a factor for them, and I think
Yeah.
most of the, it depends on your situation, but I would say that like weapons should probably be the last thing that you spend your money on. You should spend your money on like sustainable food and water purification and like just figure out what you would want on hand if an earthquake or a Hurricane Katrina type thing happened, or just pick a natural disaster that you're a tornado, whatever. And what if your local government just decide like it just can't get it back on its feet, and the federal government is, we're, does what the federal government does and takes forever. And just what would you want on hand for you? And then once you get that, think about what you'd want on hand for, your neighbors, and then encourage your neighbors to do the same. And the reason I'm like this is I I was when I was 6 years old, 5 years old, I lived in Florida, and Hurricane Andrew came through, which at that time was the largest hurricane to ever hit the United States. And I lived in Miami, and it leveled my neighborhood and like the surrounding communities. The only reason that my house and my sister's house or apartments were spared was because there was a mango grove behind them, and they like took the bulk of the wind, but just that one strip of houses were functional, and everything else for like 10 miles was like flat. And we spent like weeks camping out like on the lawns because it was too hot inside, and like we basically got in a convoy and like fled the state, and like we were running into people like selling bags of ice for like $100. Like one of my first memories is my mom like threatening some guy like on the side of the road for selling ice. And it was like I've personally seen what happens when like the system collapses, and it's not like it's not a huge thing to think of, like, what would you want on hand if something bad happened? And then if enough of you and your people have that, well, then that's how it sounds cheesy and hokey, but that's how revolution is built, is when you have the resources to repose on, that you don't need the system you're fighting against.
Yeah,
You can
that's the
more
thing.
effectively fight against it.
Exactly, exactly. And security, like I'm not I have never really lived in a place where guns is a kind of common thing, but security can also come with solidarity and communication
Yes.
and
Comms are
strategy.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, security against the state, against the police. If you have communities do that all the time. They work together to avoid allowing the police to gain intelligence about their
Hmm.
communities, for example. That's strategy, that's communication, that's just networking. No weapons required. And
Yeah.
it, I just, it's a huge task though, because the way that, especially in cities, the way that we view our neighbors is not as a community, it's not as part of a network, it's a random collection of strangers living together. It's it's incredibly sad that we're in that place, and it's entirely down to capitalism and individualism that we've become so atomized. So it's like a huge mountain to climb in itself to unatomize ourselves. But it's also right there. Like your neighbors are right there.
Hmm.
And so it's also one of the simplest, if you get me.
Yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
is just people right there, and they're probably nice, and get to know them. Because when the shit hits the fan, they're not just your neighbors, they're your support. And they're all you have. And you're their support. And you have each other and nothing else then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, hard
Grow what you
agree.
can. Grow what you can. Volunteer what you can. Sacrifice what you can. Build what you can. It should be at the forefront of everyone's mind. Survival should be at the forefront of everyone's minds right now, because we're in that kind of situation, unfortunately.
Yeah. The water is boiling currently, and none of us noticed the
Mm-hmm.
temperature increasing. But we are the things are accelerating, I think, in terms of all of this, and it's it's not unreasonable to start getting in the mode of well, like we were talking about earlier, like if we're going to advance, if we're going to tell people to go out and do things like direct action to
Mm.
subvert or damage this infrastructure that's causing all this, well, those people have to have. We can't just go out and encourage like lone wolf behavior, right? Like
Yeah.
we have those people first and foremost have to have a social base that they can operate
Mm-hmm.
out of. They have to have community that is supporting them. It's this huge. We're not encouraging like stochastic terrorism. We're encouraging
Yeah.
community action, and that is a huge difference. And that is what I think defines or should define the left, is a community based action rather than just rhetoric, which sends people spinning off into violence without really like thinking about what they're doing or why.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, destroy the thing, bring down the system, but then, oh, like we also like need something to replace it with. And that something doesn't have to be a fully thought out plan for a global economy. It could merely be, this is how we will survive while we rebuild.
Yeah.
And the we can do that, like humanity, especially these days, even though we're atomized, we also have a huge collective knowledge and resources. If we pulled together, we could survive, we could rebuild, we could replace the systems that we need to destroy. um yeah, but just so often when you talk about destroying systems, people are like, oh well, you need to plan out, to the detail exactly what you would replace it with and account for any problems that might arise before we even consider destroying a thing. And no, all we need is support so that we can survive in long enough to rebuild. And that's what we're facing right now, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, the people that made capitalism, most of them were not cognizant of what they were doing. There were a few who were, thought leaders and advocates, but most of the people involved in that just kind of did what seemed most appropriate to them at the time. And I think that the power of that cannot be overstated, of just, if enough of us decide we actually want to do something else and we don't know, we haven't worked out all the details, but everything around us is fucking garbage and we're just not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. It was survival, wasn't it? It was survival of the nobility, the birth of capitalism. They were basically doing what I'm suggesting we do, which is work out how to survive. It was it wasn't the most learned and thoughtful philosophers designing a perfect system that they thought would be amazing. It was nobility and aristocracy clinging hold to power in the face of rising contempt. Kind of slapdash.
Yeah.
We can slapdash our way towards survival too, maybe.
Yeah, that's maybe that would be maybe that's a good spot to wrap it up on, is we should slapdash our way to survival. That's the takeaway. Do you have
You heard it here first.
Yep, slapdash your way to survival. But yeah, I think I agree that we should be doing stuff with that's my official controversial statement is #do stuff.
#do stuff.
Right.
Like it.
Mica, Ponderful, do you have anything you want to end on, or you want to plug your pluggables, or I turn it over to you?
Yeah, I mean, come and follow me, come and subscribe to me. I'm on all your favorite social media outlets. I'm probably not. YouTube is my main thing. So come and subscribe to me there on Ponderful. And I also tweet occasionally, but no guarantees how long that's going to last. Yeah, just subscribe to my channel, please. I'd like that.
All right, everybody subscribe to Ponderful on YouTube. And Mica, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards again, and I just want to thank you so much for listening. This interview, hopefully, marks the return to a semi-normal release schedule. By the time this comes out, I am hoping to have finished the bulk of the book work that I need to get my, actual job up and running. So hopefully I'll have more time. If that's not the case, I will let you know. But that's sort of what I'm hoping for. We might not be releasing every 2 weeks when this comes out. We might be sticking more to a 3 or 4 week cycle until I can really button things down and get in the swing of things. But I'm hoping that I won't go, months between interview releases like I have been over the past few months because of life stuff. I appreciate your patience and sticking with it. I just wanted to say thank you for your patience on that. If you would like to support the show financially, help keep the lights on over here and pay for my Premiere and Audacity and various other software subscriptions that I use to make these shows, then you can do so by becoming a patron. You can give me money monthly on Patreon. I don't ask for a minimum donation. It's whatever you can afford. If you don't want to do a monthly donation, then you can shoot me a one-time tip via Venmo, Coffee, PayPal. All those links are in the down there part of the description. And I would encourage you to support my guest as well. Mica has a Patreon. You'll find that in the links. Always great if people get a boost in support when they come on the show, because that encourages more people to come on the show in the future. And it's also just a cool thing to do because they do good work. If you are in a position where you cannot support me financially, totally get it. I understand. Been there myself. I'm not talking to you when I say stuff like that. I want you to keep your money. But you can still support the show. You can like and subscribe and do all the YouTuber things. You can do all that stuff. Click the bell, hit the dingy thing, get notified, share the content, leave reviews, give me a 5-star rating on iTunes, leave a review. I think the only reviews that I have on iTunes are 2 fake ones that I made myself, like when I first started this 2 years ago. So y'all are slacking. I'm gonna need you to step that shit up, please, and thank you. But yeah, anything that you can do to help improve me in algorithms, to help spread the word about the show is immensely helpful, and I will appreciate it and love you forever and always. So, do that, please. If you want to follow me on social media, the @ is @ultravioletpod on all of the places. I hope Twitter will still be around by the time this comes out. I'm recording this on the 18th of December. Who the fuck knows? If not, I will probably be somewhere else, and we'll see. I intend to ride that ship until it, is subsumed by the oceans of the internet and the tears of the man baby who bought it. But, we'll see where it goes. I'm also on Twitch @UVPod. Occasionally I play video games. Hopefully I'll also have more time for that now when this comes out in the future, but we'll see. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much for listening, for watching, for getting all of this telepathically, directly from my brain. However you consume the content, I really appreciate it. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.